Sabrina 2000s comic, issue 12. We start out with Quigley telling Sabrina to run. Already he looks like an idiot. She's a witch, so anything he's scared of, she should just zap away. Why doesn't he have any faith in her? I guess because he knows she's just that stupid. She asks what's the matter, and predictably, he's freaking out about a giant plant who bursts through the floor of his greenhouse. It's a rare South American jungle flower that can't grow around here. Since it's South American, she immediately figures out why it grew, and says that that thing is bristling with green magic, so it's got to be from Landra. Wait, she's from South America? It's interesting that she's from South America, but it's confusing because she said her father is a shaman and a witch doctor. When she mentioned Landra's name, the blossom opened. I know this flower thing is trying to take advantage of her green magic just because she lives in a rainforest, but simply warping a letter to her would have been much simpler without scaring Quigley. He didn't suffer enough anyways. It's not like he suffered amusing slapstick. Landra's letter says that she misses her and wants to show her the rainforest at a sleepover this weekend, if it's okay with her family. I guess that rainforest can't be too dangerous if Landra survives in it just fine without getting a fever. They're witches after all. We cut to later where Hilda agrees to send Sabrina over to the house of some family she's never met before without even insisting on coming with her to supervise and get to know them first. I'm sure they're trustworthy since they're Landra's family and she won't invite her over to a house that wasn't safe, but still, it's lucky for Sabrina that she's in a good mood. Quigley and Salem thinks it's a dumb idea, and I wish they were written to explain why instead of just seeming like strawmen. Normally when Salem warns Sabrina not to do something, he ends up being right. Simply saying it's dangerous isn't quite good enough because Sabrina's a witch. It's interesting that Hilda's spell phone barely penetrates the jungle because it doesn't get good cell phone reception. So I guess she's relying on an invisible magical satellite. Hilda says that Landra's father assured her it was safe, and she just took his word for it. And Zelda says that Sabrina will take the spell phone with her in case there's a problem. You know, as opposed to simply warping home, with pixie powder at least. Salem says a quote from some work of fiction that took me out of it immediately, just for the sake of the meme. If that's all he's afraid of, that's stupid because Sabrina's a witch. She guilts Quigley by acting sad, saying that she'll learn so much and have him to thank for the memories. It's a smart idea to make sure Salem goes with Sabrina to protect her. And I do like him a lot more than her fun-ruining aunt who would just ruin the sleepover. Hilda and Zelda says that's a good idea, and Sabrina goes into a flower, because Landra simply warping her to her would be too simple. To be fair, for all she knows, Sabrina might be in the bathroom when she tried to warp her to her. But how does she know that she's making physical contact with that flower so that she knows it's time to warp her home? Because she zaps that flower up, she can feel what it feels? I guess so. I guess it has a spell on it so that when she goes into it, it'll automatically go back to her. The flower closes up around Sabrina, and naturally they'll find it unsettling. And Hilda whispers that she's getting out of here because green magic gives her the creeps. And Zelda says that green magic can have that effect on you. They're okay with all the other selfish spells they do. Like, one of them turning her boyfriend into a tree. So why is Sabrina holding a suitcase? She's just here for a sleepover. She sure is polite to not complain about the heat of the jungle immediately. They hug each other, and Landra says it's great to see her again, as I wish she got to meet Chloe. Salem actually reacts to the flying hearts instead of them not actually being there, because I guess they summoned it intentionally as witches, even though there's no zap written there. If it got summoned by accident, mortals would freak out about Sabrina hugging Chloe. Landra tells Salem that in the rainforest we respect all creatures. Oh yeah, that's why poachers exist. What a nice idealistic place, Sabrina's planet. She says that above all, the black jaguar rules, and Salem takes it as a compliment. I don't care that she lives in a jungle, you'd think she would still know what to call a cat. Again, this sure is a strange version of Earth, and not even in a memorable sense. Well, it's sweet of Salem to cheer up so easily. Landra says that she hasn't cleaned their guest hut yet, even though she's a witch, but she can put her suitcase inside. Sabrina asks where her parents are, as Salem wants to learn more about the black jaguar, and is of course ignored because he's whispering like a moron. Landra says that her father had to respond to a call in a remote village, and for no reason her mother went with him instead of supervising her. She says they'll be back soon, and tells Sabrina to be careful in there. Sabrina wants to get her camera, and Salem screams at seeing a pet snake that can talk. I guess because of a magical spell on him, since he escaped from a zoo, hopped a boat, and came home chic. I hate his silly accents being spelled out, because it makes it harder to understand what he's saying and defeats my motivation at first glance to read his dialogue. Why didn't Landra tell Salem about the pet snake before he went inside? That was a mean prank. Somehow Sabrina's lying unconscious on the floor with a red recluse spiderweb above her because she's been bitten. I have to assume she was bitten before she could react to it and zap it away. So, did someone leave the door open too long? That was very stupid of that person. Maybe if these guys had cast an anti-spider spell on their home, they wouldn't have this problem. But that's what a witch would do. Landra tells her pet snake to get the anti-venom extract in her father's room. It is a bit interesting to see a snake for a pet, but I still think that her having a cat or dog would be more likely, especially since it came from a zoo. So it's not even justified by her just finding the snake in her forest and using a native animal as a pet. It's literally just there to be exotic looking. Salem says he's rusty on medicine spells, and it turns out that Landra's father took his antidote bottle on his call, and all the snake can find is leftover Gaia root, the rare plant that the antidote is made from. Sure, it's convenient that it's here. All I'm thinking is that this could have easily not happened. She could have so easily just had a sleepover with her like it was a normal house. But of course, that'd be a boring plot. Landra says that the plant will stabilize her, but they need more Gaia root when it's hard to find. She doesn't just warp the plant to her because she's an idiot. Why does Salem think he needs to step outside to use a spell phone? Why would he go outside when he should have heard it raining before he even went out? That wasted panels. Sabrina wakes up as she's told that Salem's on his way to get her more medicine, instead of summoning Gaia root to him after being shown what it looks like. Salem's told that a rainstorm caused a flood, and the only place they can find the plant is on the other side. I assumed Salem would at least use magic to float over the water or part the floodwaters. It also makes sense that he summoned some ice path, except not, because even he knows that the warm water would melt it fast. We didn't need this stupid snake to exist. He wants to uproot the plant and head back, and he's drawn to walk towards it while he's saying that. Which at least tries to imply that he's not just standing there talking. So it wasn't his fault that a bird snatched the plant away. He didn't know it would show up. And then Salem uses magic to freeze the bird in time and bring it back to him. No, that'd be good writing. Freezing time in general would also be good writing. Instead, they waste 2 panels bickering when Sabrina needs urgent help. The snake asks if Salem's trying to anger the rainforest spirits. So, people killing even one animal in the jungle angers the rainforest spirits on this planet. Well, that's nothing like real life, that's for sure, and is certainly helpful to those animals. Why are those spirits exclusive to rainforests? If angering the rainforest spirits has a clear, tangible effect, you'd think mortals would know about them by now. I guess the effect doesn't make magic obvious. The snake tells them to grab hold of him for a reverse bungee jump, and the snake jumps all the way up to the bird, like he's the snake animal buddy from Donkey Kong Country. I hope this was the writer's own idea and he didn't just steal this from Donkey Kong Country. And Salem gets the plant back. He could have easily not done that, because he's a warlock, so he didn't need its help. And more panels are wasted until Sabrina says she's feeling better. Landra's father says he's proud of her for treating her properly, just as Salem's coming over to her. So if Sabrina was already feeling better, that makes it look like Salem wasted his time. So that shouldn't have been written. Landra's mother says she'll make Sabrina dinner after a walk. Landra thanks her, and the story ends with Landra walking to the forest holding her hand, saying that this, for some reason, is one of the most magical places on the planet. And there's a text box asking the audience to tell the comic staff facts about the rainforest. Which only reminded me that the comic wasted 2 opportunities to tell the audience about those kinds of facts. It's too bad the story didn't develop on Landra at all. So much for the story having a point. We already knew she lived in a rainforest and had a shaman father. She at least is capable of having a flaw because she scared Salem with a pet snake instead of warning him about him. But that was probably not meant to say anything about her because Salem gets mistreated all the time. He always has bad luck. Wait, is that supposed to be because black cats are considered bad luck and the whole joke is that the luck's directed at only him? That's not funny, it's depressing. And you'd think that Sabrina would have gotten that spider bite in the forest itself instead. There's a comedy page where Zelda's stuck on solitaire. She zaps a card and says there's a black 5 on the red 6. It walks around and she zaps again, saying red jack on the black queen. So why is she allowed to use magic so casually and Sabrina isn't? This was kinda interesting, but a waste of time that makes her look like a hypocrite again. Sabrina says that nobody can play cards like Zelda. You know, aside from every other witch ever. In the next story, Salem's reflection impossibly insults him and zaps him and escapes from the mirror, which is apparently a portal to the negative realm. I guess he made it a portal with a spell. Salem already tried to take over the world, but I guess we're supposed to think this evil twin is even eviler. What did he think he had to gain in going to another dimension? What could he do here that he couldn't do back home? This makes Pandarus' first issue look logical. At least on Mobius I could buy that a portal to another universe could show up, even if it's too convenient, because that's already a franchise where completing a level with 50 rings creates a portal to the special zone. So maybe Sonic got 50 rings, and that always creates those portals. Here, this is normal Earth, and his evil twin never even met him until now, and yet he knew to go here. Why is he eviler than Salem? A life that's even worse than a life that motivated him to want to take over the world? It was confusing to have both Salems look exactly the same. And in a further ripoff of the 90s comic issue where this happened to Sabrina, once again the evil twin has a name that's backwards. But at least I'll actually say it right this time. So, Melas is the one who throws Salem into the negative realm, where he looks weird for no physical reason. Melas wants to put his years of studying Salem to the test. How did he study him? I guess a crystal ball. I guess any witch's magic homework would tell them about all the infinite parallel universes, and therefore other versions of them. But still, what's his motivation? Even Sonic makes more sense than this. We know that Scourge's life back home sucked, and he had every reason to try and impersonate Sonic because Sonic's friends were nice to him instead of throwing a knife at him. Maybe Melas' host family is horrible to him. But then why does he think it's smart to ruin Salem's reputation and make a family that's nice to him hate him? He's actually nice to Sabrina and Quigley, complimenting all of them. Okay, so he's actually being smart by making sure they keep liking him. It spares us drama, but it also doesn't take advantage of the concept of the evil twin being there. Realistically, you'd think they'd assume he was up to no good and just buttering them up, meaning they'd trust him less, though he's not cleaning the house outright. So they naively assume that he's just in a good mood, after he had some mildly entertaining dialogue where he tried to sound cool. Melas plans on conquering the world, despite the fact that he knows that it went poorly for Salem centuries ago. What makes him think he won't get caught and foiled again just as easily? Why doesn't he do this on his planet? Also, how's he a magical cat too? You'd think that if the logic for why he's eviler and it's called the negative realm is that everyone good there is evil because they somehow all coincidentally had horrible childhoods and turned on the world. If we're supposed to assume the Witches' Council is good, and that's why they're merciful enough to have such a light punishment for Salem, why did Melas get the exact same punishment? A less merciful Witches' Council in general wouldn't let him keep his powers. They'd depower him and sentence him to hard labor or kill him. I guess even though it's called the Negative Realm, the Witches' Council is still exactly the same. There's just different people on it. Totally takes advantage of the name. Sabrina's shown right behind Melas, so good thing he just thought his plan. And then she says that he's about to go to the vet. So I have to assume he was out of earshot when she said this. If these three were smart, they'd use their magic on Melas to make him unable to resist their efforts to take him to the vet. A spell could be cast on him that'd make him really unmotivated to move. Him not fighting back here wouldn't take advantage of the concept of him being an evil twin. We unfortunately cut back to Salem when the background and him look unappealing. The background's black, and Salem's nothing but white outlines. I assume he can't see anything if it's so dark. How is it so dark? Did some witches do that? Every time he uses his magic, it backfires on him. I can't see how because the art sucks. He comes to the wild conclusion that everything works in reverse here just because it's called the Negative Realm, when magic backfiring on him sounds like it's negative. So, it doesn't have to backfire on him because everything works in reverse, it's just the negative thing to happen. I assumed that his magic as a whole was made worthless because of the negative Witches' Council spell on Melas, and the spell activated on him because he was mistaken for him. Instead he casts a Leave Me Alone spell, and that summons the locals, who all look like outlines of eyes. And that makes no sense considering that Melas looked just like him. Were they all transformed into that by evil witches? That's dark. A whole Earth that's ruined by witches. You'd think that'd make more logical sense than Sabrina's world, but that would suck to read about. You'd think Salem's spell would be, "Don't bring me home," and so he'd immediately go home. He has absolutely no reason to summon the locals. Seriously, there was no excuse for art that bad. Even Pender's first issue didn't make that mistake. Everything looked fine. It didn't degrade just because it was another dimension. I'm actually glad the story cut past Mel's being taken to the vet and given shots and tests, because it's not anything special to see. But it would be satisfying to see Mel's get punished by having to deal with the vet. He is trying to act polite to avoid pissing them off, so he probably thought he couldn't get away with warping away or running away. Especially since they're witches who could just warp him back to them anyways. And if he killed them with his magic, which would take 1 second and be what I'd expect an evil twin to do, then, I guess he assumes that the spy witches would see that and severely punish him. But why would he even bother trying to conquer the world if he knows he's always being spied on? It's interesting that realistically Mel's just wants to lie down and thinks that world domination can wait. Sabrina says that he needs to have a flea bath, as the doctor said. Hilda picks him up, and Zelda gets a big basin full of water, when they could have just pointed at him and magically given him a flea bath with a spell, so I guess they're just doing this then because they don't like him. And the story cuts away instead of showing his evil twin being given a flea bath. Why is the story cutting away from showing a slapstick against an evil twin? I would have rather seen that than all those confusing panels in the negative realm with no real plot. The next panel shows Salem back home. It's such bullshit that we're not shown or told how he got back. He says, "It took some doing." How would he have ever convinced the locals of the negative realm that he's not Melis? Did he go through a mirror? He's not near a mirror, I think. The artist was too lazy to draw a background in the panel where he's supposed to have gotten back home. If he just warped home, he would have done that right away, instead of wasting time getting the locals to find him. You'd think that the locals would have hated and feared him because they'd think he was Melis. I just have to assume that they feared him enough to do whatever he wanted and let him go to a mirror to get home. I have a question. Why did Melis think that he wouldn't be able to get back home if it was this easy? Do you think an evil twin witch would just kill him in a second, not take him over to his dimension and hope he doesn't come home? Just like with Scourge, the only way he can fill in this plot hole is to say that he's not nearly as evil as you'd expect. Apparently he doesn't want to kill him if he thinks he doesn't have to. But again, why would he think he doesn't have to? He's a witch. He's lucky Salem didn't just warp to him and kill him, or at least freeze him in time. It's not like Melis depowered Salem. This kind of concept doesn't work with characters as powerful as witches. Salem runs ahead, protective of his family, and his evil twin runs into him, and Melis tells him that he can have his turf because he hates the needles and shampoo, which you'd think would be a part of his life in the negative realm too. I guess he doesn't have a host family looking after him. Who's supposed to be supervising him when he still has magic he could abuse? If witches are always supervising him wherever he goes, why didn't they see him switch Salem with him and immediately stop him? And why'd he even try that? And why didn't Salem get rescued by a spy witch immediately? Or Enchantress? I guess this proves that witches are only spied on when they're around mortals, and they just have to hope any witches abusing magic off camera get themselves caught. So if a witch shapeshifted into another one to try to take over the witch world, wouldn't she succeed then? And wouldn't that happen all the time? Because no one would see her shapeshift in her place and kill her? The story ends with Salem just being happy to see Sabrina again, to the point of being fine with having a bath and saying that it's just what he needs. I know he's a cat, but he's still got a human mind. So I don't see why he's so opposed to taking a bath, flea bath or otherwise, to the point where they have to force him, unless it literally hurts. You'd think he would have said so and they'd cast a spell to make him immune to pain for a while. So he just hates those baths because he's been made a cat. He somehow has both cat instincts and his human mind, where he doesn't have two distinct brains at once fighting for control. The human brain would have no reason to have cat instincts just because it's in a cat-shaped body, biologically speaking. The vet would have found out about a human-shaped brain even if it was small enough to fit in a cat. The vet would find out if he had a brain structured like a human because of tests. I guess not, because he'd have no reason to give him a brain scan. A human brain would obviously be way too big to fit in a cat, so I guess his real mind is invisible in his aura and magically keeps in contact with him. I guess his real mind is in nanomachines somewhere, right outside of his body, or in his bloodstream. It's a creative twist on this kind of cliche story that the evil twin willingly goes back home because he hates Salem's life so much. He might as well have not wanted to take over the world at all though if we didn't even get to see him try. We should have at least learned what his plan to do that was. It seems like he was no more dangerous than Salem. In the comedy page, Hilda says a witch interjection because it's already 2 o'clock when she still has to do the dishes and vacuum the downstairs before her appointment. Why was she even considering not using magic to do it? She animates the vacuum and tells it to clean those floors. Logic would dictate that this wouldn't backfire. Instead, the story ends with it vacuuming Salem when he's not the floor. Well, he was probably on the floor, but he should have heard the vacuum coming and left the floor. If this is supposed to be punishing Hilda for cheating by using magic, I have to wonder if this was released before the invention of the Roomba. It would have had a better chance of being funny if we actually saw the vacuum collide with Salem. In the next story, with Sabrina dressed in a Halloween costume, she asks who a monster near the spooky jar is and asks why the jar is empty. The home invader replies that he's a grating gremlin from the other realm whose job is to test supernatural creatures living in the mortal world. It turns out that because he's doing poorly, he might lose his jar privileges. His test is to go frighten someone, which is somehow considered a morally righteous thing to tell him to do, on a planet where witches are trying to hide magic. So, is Spooky supposed to be a ghost and that's why he's told to frighten someone for no reason? He's green! He lived in a cookie jar. I'm expected to believe that because it's Halloween, he can't frighten people, even though he's clearly able to float. Every other time Spooky's appeared in the comic, he's scared people just fine. Why didn't he just grow giant and pick them up like he did the last time he showed up? Why does one of the kids think he saw a string holding him up in the air? What would the string hang off of? How is this funny? It's stupid. He says this is an outrage and inexplicably decides to scare some adults instead of getting revenge on those kids. I guess because he doesn't hate kids that much. Why is he knocking on the door instead of magically forcing his way into the house, which would get the guy scared easily? He's floating. Why would he just be called a wise guy? I guess because he's not floating high up enough. It makes sense that he'd be mistaken for having a costume on because these people aren't looking down at his feet. They're too close up to him and they're paying enough attention. The guy kicks him away, telling him to get a job, which he should do instead of just being confusing. Sabrina tells him that he just needs a good costume. He disguises himself as a person with internal revenue here to do a tax audit on those people, and that makes them scream. Logically, they'd be screaming because of his green skin as well, because if he's saying this and holding a suitcase and wearing that suit, he's not trick-or-treating. This issue is by Mike Gallagher. The first story is about Sabrina going to visit Landria in South America instead of Africa. I guess I wasn't paying enough attention last time because her lack of personality and the clichéness of that story bored me. Sabrina could have easily just had a normal sleepover with her. But instead she gets bitten by a poisonous spider in a house that's supposed to be safe. It would have been more natural if it happened to her in a rainforest. It was so predictable that something would happen to her because she went to the rainforest, because otherwise the story would be boring. We knew she was guaranteed to be fine, but it was still a bit exciting and interesting to see Salem have to get a plant to cure her, because he had to cross over an icy bridge above some floodwaters, and the snake had to jump really high to get it from a bird. It was immediately obvious that they should have just used magic to warp the Gaia plant to them immediately, but it wouldn't have been an interesting story if we didn't see Salem go on a journey to get the Gaia plant. It should have been explained that it's impossible to use magic in the rainforest. The snake was really annoying with his dialogue, and Salem should have just gotten the plant back himself with his magic. He would have just frozen time immediately so that he'd have all the time in the world to get the plant, without the venom going through Sabrina even more. The second story is about Salem being replaced by an evil twin through the mirror, with no explanation about how Melis learned about him and why on earth he wanted to do that instead of just trying to take over his own dimension. But the story doesn't go the way you'd expect it to. Melis gets scared into going home by a visit to the vet and a flea bath, without ever telling us what his exact plan for taking over the world was. So there were stakes for all of 2 seconds each. The first time there were stakes, I thought he'd ruined Salem's reputation by mistreating his family. If he was really as spiteful as possible, he'd not only kill Salem, but also do that. It would have made sense if he hit Salem in the head, and he just thought that he killed him, but he didn't. If he was that spiteful, he'd prevent Sabrina and her family from tormenting him with his magic. Try to get revenge instead of cowardly running away. He might as well have not been an evil twin at all. He was only an evil twin to give him a reason to come here. I guess he thought that keeping a bunch of witches from suspecting him was smarter, because they'd try to stop him. But was too dumb to realize that he'd be caught the second he tried to take over the world, like Salem was. The negative realm was nothing like you'd imagine. It doesn't show us a world where the good people were evil. It doesn't show us a world where Sabrina's family are evil and dressed like witches. Why was Salem's magic reversed in the boring-looking negative realm that was barely explored and had locals that looked nothing like Melas? You'd think Melas would have been killed in that universe. The third story was a dumb plot where Spooky kept failing to scare people with his omnipotent powers because he was mistaken for a Halloween costume. And he never says that nobody saw he was floating because they didn't look at his feet. He could have very easily scared people, come on. He'd float a lot higher at least. He'd just grow big again. He wasn't even trying. Somehow he was in danger of losing his jar privileges because of this. Why would scaring innocent mortals give him jar privileges? Don't witches want to hide magic? Mortals would know about magic then. What's the point of having beings like him scare mortals just to erase their memories of it afterwards? For the sadism, I guess, when they won't be affected by it an hour later. This is like a story where Eggman would keep failing to make machines successfully.